What would you do if someone offered you everything you ever wanted, but at the cost of your soul? This is the story of a man who had to make that choice. Charlie Kirk wasn't born into wealth or privilege. At 18 years old, he started a movement from his parents' basement with nothing but a laptop, a vision, and an unshakable belief in conservative values. He worked late into the night, making phone calls, organizing small events, and collecting rejection letters from major donors who thought he was too young, too inexperienced, too idealistic. But Charlie believed that if you speak the truth, people will listen. He just had to find them. Charlie's authenticity struck a chord. Within 5 years, his grassroots organization grew to reach millions of young Americans. He became a voice for a generation, filling stadiums with thousands of attendees, creating viral social media moments, and appearing on major news networks. His college campus tours were packed with students, hungry for a perspective they felt was missing from their education. Yet, despite his influence, Charlie remained financially modest. While other political commentators signed multi-million-dollar deals with major networks, he reinvested everything back into the movement. His old Toyota had 200,000 miles on it. His office was a rented space above a pizzeria. He paid himself $75,000 a year, less than most of his staff. At home one evening, his wife Sarah reminded him about the mounting hospital bills and his mother's mortgage troubles. With a baby on the way, they could barely afford their small apartment. Charlie looked at the stack of bills on their kitchen table and said what he always said, that he didn't start this movement to get rich. He started it because it mattered. Sarah touched his hand gently. She wasn't complaining about the mission. She believed in what he was doing. She just wished doing the right thing paid a little better. Charlie stared out the window into the night, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The next day, Charlie's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief but intriguing, an invitation from Marcus Vanderbilt, the 8th richest man in America, to discuss an opportunity that could change everything. The meeting was set for 7 p.m. the following evening at an address in the most expensive part of the city. Charlie's assistant nearly dropped her coffee when he asked who Marcus Vanderbilt was. He was a tech billionaire who had made his fortune in social media and data analytics, someone known for being brilliant, ruthless, and intensely private. People like that didn't take meetings for no reason. The next evening, Charlie arrived at a gleaming skyscraper that pierced the clouds. The elevator ride to the 85th floor felt like ascending into another world. The penthouse overlooked the entire city and everything Charlie could see below. The people, the buildings, the movement of an entire metropolis seemed small enough to fit in the palm of Marcus Vanderbilt's hand. Marcus was in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Charlie's car. He was charismatic, but there was something calculating in his eyes, like a chess player always thinking 3 moves ahead. He poured expensive whiskey and got straight to the point. He told Charlie that he saw wasted potential. Charlie had built something remarkable with scraps, but imagine what he could do with real resources. Marcus could give him an audience of 50 million instead of 5 million. He could provide $50 million up front and $25 million annually after that. He would build Charlie a media empire that made Fox News look like a college radio station. Charlie asked the obvious question, why? What did Marcus want in return? Marcus explained that he wanted to invest in the future of conservative media, and he wanted Charlie to lead it as CEO of Vanderbilt Media Group's new political division. The offer included a complete television network, podcast network, social media infrastructure, and a team of 500 people. Charlie would have a corner office in this very building, a $2 million salary, and stock options worth another $20 million, plus creative control. Mostly. That last word hung in the air. Charlie pressed him on what mostly meant. Marcus poured more whiskey and explained that he was a businessman with investors, board members, and other interests. There would need to be some alignment on certain issues. For instance, Marcus had significant investments in pharmaceutical companies, so perhaps they would avoid being too critical of vaccine mandates moving forward. He was heavily involved in tech, so maybe they would soften the rhetoric about big tech censorship. It was still bad, of course, but they would call it complex rather than evil. Charlie shifted uncomfortably as Marcus continued. Some of Charlie's associates were a bit too controversial. That firebrand senator he kept promoting, the one who talked about draining the swamp, had made enemies of some very powerful people, including some of Marcus's business partners. Charlie would need to distance himself from the more extreme elements. Charlie objected that those weren't extreme elements, those were people fighting for the truth. Marcus leaned back in his chair and smiled. Truth was a luxury, he said. Power was what changed things, and he was offering Charlie power beyond his wildest dreams. Charlie took the contract home that night, his mind spinning. When Sarah read through it, her hands trembled. This was $50 million. Do you know what this would mean for their family? For his mother? They could pay off every debt, save for their child's college, and his mother could finally retire. Charlie would still be doing what he loved, reaching people and spreading his message. But Charlie reminded her about the guardrails, the compromises Marcus wanted. Sarah asked if they were really compromises or just maturity. Every successful person makes concessions. That's how the real world works. The next day, Charlie met with his core team. The room divided immediately. One team member called it the opportunity of a lifetime, imagining what they could do with real funding. Another team member pushed back hard. They would have to stop criticizing big pharma and big tech. Those were literally the enemies they had been fighting. The first argued that they would still have a platform. They would just pick their battles more carefully and reach 10 times as many people. The second countered that reaching people with a watered-down message was worse than reaching fewer people with the truth. That night, Charlie lay awake, unable to sleep. He thought about his mother struggling with bills. He thought about his wife, scared about their future. He thought about his team who had sacrificed so much for the mission. And he thought about the millions of young people who trusted him to tell them the truth no matter what. Memories flooded back. He remembered being young and making a promise to himself to never compromise. He remembered his first speech about integrity. He remembered a young supporter at a rally who told him, "You're the only one who doesn't lie to us." He remembered his father's words, "Son, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything."
Charlie reached out to a mentor, an older conservative commentator who had been in the game for decades. Over coffee, the mentor admitted that he had taken a deal like Marcus's once, 20 years ago. It was the best decision he ever made financially, and the worst decision he ever made for his soul. Charlie protested that his mentor was still successful, still had influence. The mentor corrected him. He had a platform, but he had lost his voice. There was a difference. He saw the fire in Charlie that he used to have and warned him not to let them put it out. Once you start compromising, you never stop. First, it's softening your stance on vaccines. Then it's overlooking corruption because it's on your side. Then it's justifying things you know are wrong because you've convinced yourself you're playing the long game. But what if he could do more good with more resources? Charlie asked. The mentor shook his head. That's what they all say. That's what he had said. People don't follow you because of your resources. They follow you because they trust you. The moment you lose that trust, all the money in the world won't buy it back. Charlie spent the next few days digging into Marcus Vanderbilt's background. What he found was disturbing. News articles about Vanderbilt's company silencing whistleblowers. Reports of him funding politicians on both sides to control outcomes. A pattern of buying media companies and gutting their investigative teams. Former Vanderbilt partners who mysteriously lost their platforms after disagreeing with him. Charlie called an investigative journalist who had covered Vanderbilt for years. The journalist was blunt. Every media personality Vanderbilt had invested in eventually became a mouthpiece. Not immediately. It was subtle and gradual. First, you just avoid certain topics. Then you start promoting his interests. Within 2 years, you don't even recognize yourself anymore. Guys like Vanderbilt don't invest in people, the journalist warned. They collect them. Charlie requested another meeting with Marcus. When he arrived at the penthouse, Marcus greeted him with a broad smile, assuming Charlie was there to sign the contract. Charlie pulled out the contract and tore it in half. The smile vanished from Marcus's face. He asked very coldly why Charlie would do that. Charlie told him that he finally understood what Marcus was really buying. He didn't want a media CEO. He wanted a puppet, someone with credibility he could use to manipulate millions of people. Marcus called that a very cynical interpretation. Charlie said he had looked into Marcus's history. Every person he had invested in had lost their edge. They became safe, controllable, corporate. That wasn't influence, that was castration. Marcus stood, his presence suddenly intimidating. He told Charlie he was making a mistake. He was offering him a seat at the table. Turn this down, and Charlie would never get another opportunity like it. Marcus would make sure of that. Charlie said he guessed he would have to build his own table. Marcus laughed bitterly. With what? His rented office and ancient car? Charlie would be struggling for scraps while Marcus elevated his competitors. He would fund someone else, someone smarter, someone who understood how power really works. Charlie told him to do it, but they wouldn't be him, and the people who followed Charlie would know the difference. Marcus's voice dripped with contempt. Principles don't pay mortgages. Integrity doesn't put food on the table. Charlie thought he was a hero, but he was just a fool, too proud to take help. Charlie walked toward the door. Maybe he was a fool, he admitted, but he would be a fool who could look himself in the mirror, a fool who could face the people who trusted him, a fool who didn't have to check with his billionaire handler before speaking the truth. As Charlie reached for the door handle, Marcus called after him, "You'll regret this." Charlie paused and looked back. Maybe, but he would regret taking Marcus's deal more. He walked out into the night and breathed deeply, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He called Sarah and told her he had said no. After a long pause, she asked if he was okay. He told her he was actually better than he had been in weeks. Sarah started crying and told her she was scared, but proud of him.
A few days later, Charlie recorded a video from his modest office. He told his audience about the opportunity he had been offered. $50 million, a media empire, resources beyond imagination. All he had to do was compromise, just a little, on the principles they had fought for together. He had said no. Not because he didn't want to grow or reach more people, but because he realized that his followers didn't trust him because he had the biggest platform or the most money. They trusted him to tell the truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it cost him something. He admitted he wasn't special. He was scared. He didn't know how they were going to compete with people who had unlimited resources. He didn't know if choosing integrity over money was the smart business decision, but he knew it was the right decision. They had started this movement with nothing but truth and conviction. That's how they would continue. They can have their billions. We'll keep our souls. And in the end, that matters more. The video went viral within hours. Comments flooded in from supporters who felt betrayed by other influencers who had sold out. One comment read, "This is why we follow you. You're real." Another said, "I only make minimum wage, but I'm sending you $20. It's all I can spare, but you deserve it." But not everyone was supportive. Within days, the backlash began. Marcus Vanderbilt was not a man who accepted rejection gracefully. Within a week of Charlie's public video, the attacks began, coordinated, calculated, and devastating. First came the media blitz. News outlets that had previously been friendly to Charlie suddenly ran hit pieces. Anonymous sources claimed he had mismanaged funds. Old tweets were dug up and presented out of context.
A former disgruntled employee gave an interview painting Charlie as difficult and controlling. Then, the platform restrictions hit. Charlie's social media reach mysteriously plummeted. Videos that used to get millions of views now struggled to break 100,000. His accounts were flagged for violating community standards over minor technicalities. Shadow bans made his content invisible to new audiences. Major advertisers pulled out overnight. Companies that had supported his events for years suddenly claimed they were going in a different direction. Charlie's team had to lay off a third of their staff. The pizzeria landlord, pressured by mysterious calls from concerned citizens, raised the rent by 300%. Charlie's mentor called him one evening. He had seen this playbook before. Vanderbilt was making an example of him. The message to every other influencer was clear: you're either with us or against us. There's no middle ground. At home, the pressure intensified. Sarah was 7 months pregnant, and the stress was taking its toll. Their health insurance had been tied to one of the sponsors who pulled out. Medical bills were piling up. Charlie's mother called crying. Someone had sent threatening letters to her home, warning her that her son was on the wrong side of history. Charlie's team gathered for an emergency meeting. The mood was somber. They had fought hard battles before, but this felt different. This felt orchestrated. One team member broke down, admitting she had been approached by one of Vanderbilt's representatives, offering her twice her salary to leak internal communications and strategy documents. Another team member, James, spoke up. He had been with Charlie since the beginning, sleeping on couches and eating ramen noodles in those early days. He reminded everyone why they started this fight. It wasn't for money or fame, it was because mainstream media had failed an entire generation. They had built something real, something that mattered to millions of young people who felt voiceless. Were they really going to let one billionaire destroy that? The room fell silent. Then slowly, heads began to nod. They had come too far to quit now. Charlie stood up and addressed his team. He apologized for bringing this storm down on them. He offered anyone who wanted to leave the chance to do so with his blessing and a good reference. But for those who stayed, he promised they would fight smarter, not just harder. That night, Charlie couldn't sleep. He walked into the nursery they had been preparing for the baby. The crib was secondhand, the walls painted by hand because they couldn't afford a professional. He thought about bringing a child into this chaos, into a world where standing for principle could cost you everything. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You still have a chance to make this right. The offer stands with adjustments for your theatrics. You have 48 hours. MV. Charlie stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it.
A few days later, Charlie recorded a video from his modest office. He told his audience about the opportunity he had been offered. $50 million, a media empire, resources beyond imagination. All he had to do was compromise, just a little, on the principles they had fought for together. He had said no. Not because he didn't want to grow or reach more people, but because he realized that his followers didn't trust him because he had the biggest platform or the most money. They trusted him to tell the truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it cost him something. He admitted he wasn't special. He was scared. He didn't know how they were going to compete with people who had unlimited resources. He didn't know if choosing integrity over money was the smart business decision, but he knew it was the right decision. They had started this movement with nothing but truth and conviction. That's how they would continue. They can have their billions. We'll keep our souls. And in the end, that matters more. The video went viral within hours. Comments flooded in from supporters who felt betrayed by other influencers who had sold out. One comment read, "This is why we follow you. You're real." Another said, "I only make minimum wage, but I'm sending you $20. It's all I can spare, but you deserve it." But not everyone was supportive. Within days, the backlash began.
Marcus Vanderbilt was not a man who accepted rejection gracefully. Within a week of Charlie's public video, the attacks began, coordinated, calculated, and devastating. First came the media blitz. News outlets that had previously been friendly to Charlie suddenly ran hit pieces. Anonymous sources claimed he had mismanaged funds. Old tweets were dug up and presented out of context. A former disgruntled employee gave an interview painting Charlie as difficult and controlling. Then the platform restrictions hit. Charlie's social media reach mysteriously plummeted. Videos that used to get millions of views now struggled to break 100,000. His accounts were flagged for violating community standards over minor technicalities. Shadow bans made his content invisible to new audiences. Major advertisers pulled out overnight. Companies that had supported his events for years suddenly claimed they were going in a different direction. Charlie's team had to lay off a third of their staff. The pizzeria landlord, pressured by mysterious calls from concerned citizens, raised the rent by 300%. Charlie's mentor called him one evening. He had seen this playbook before. Vanderbilt was making an example of him. The message to every other influencer was clear. You're either with us or against us. There's no middle ground. At home, the pressure intensified. Sarah was 7 months pregnant, and the stress was taking its toll. Their health insurance had been tied to one of the sponsors who pulled out. Medical bills were piling up. Charlie's mother called crying. Someone had sent threatening letters to her home warning that her son was on the wrong side of history. Charlie's team gathered for an emergency meeting. The mood was somber. They had fought hard battles before, but this felt different. This felt orchestrated. One team member broke down, admitting that she had been approached by one of Vanderbilt's representatives, offering her twice her salary to leak internal communications and strategy documents. Another team member, James, spoke up. He had been with Charlie since the beginning, sleeping on couches and eating ramen noodles in those early days. He reminded everyone why they started this fight. It wasn't for money or fame. It was because mainstream media had failed an entire generation. They had built something real, something that mattered to millions of young people who felt voiceless. Were they really going to let one billionaire destroy that? The room fell silent. Then, slowly, heads began to nod. They had come too far to quit now. Charlie stood up and addressed his team. He apologized for bringing the storm down on them. He offered anyone who wanted to leave the chance to do so with his blessing and a good reference. But for those who stayed, he promised they would fight smarter, not just harder. That night, Charlie couldn't sleep. He walked into the nursery they had been preparing for the baby. The crib was secondhand, the walls painted by hand because they couldn't afford a professional. He thought about bringing a child into this chaos, into a world where standing for principle could cost you everything. His phone buzzed.
It was a text from an unknown number. You still have a chance to make this right. The offer stands with adjustments for your theatrics. You have 48 hours. MV. Charlie stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. Charlie realized that defense wasn't going to save them. They needed to go on offense, but strategically. He gathered a small core team, the people he trusted most, and they began planning. First, they went grassroots in a way that even Vanderbilt's billions couldn't counter. Charlie announced a 50-city tour, all in small venues, community centers, high school gyms, church basements. No big production, no fancy lighting, just him, a microphone, and the truth. Tickets were $10. Every penny would go toward keeping the organization alive. The response was overwhelming. Every venue sold out within hours. People drove hundreds of miles to attend. The crowds weren't coming for entertainment. They were coming to be part of a movement. At the first event in a packed high school gymnasium in Ohio, Charlie shared everything.
He told them about Vanderbilt's offer in detail. He told them about the retaliation. He told them that powerful forces wanted to silence voices like theirs, but that together they were stronger than any billionaire. A young woman in the audience stood up during the Q&A. She was a college student working 2 jobs to pay her tuition. She said that she had grown up believing that everyone in media and politics was corrupt, that everyone had a price. Watching Charlie turn down $50 million had restored her faith that integrity still existed. She pulled out her phone and started a live stream. Within minutes, thousands were watching. By the end of the event, millions had seen clips. Social media erupted. The hashtag #IntegrityOverDollars trended nationwide. People began sharing their own stories of standing up to corruption, of choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. Independent journalists who had been silenced by corporate media began amplifying Charlie's message.
Then came an unexpected ally. Senator Catherine Rodriguez, the so-called firebrand that Vanderbilt had wanted Charlie to distance himself from, reached out. She had been fighting corporate corruption in Washington for years, making enemies of some of the most powerful people in the country. She told Charlie she knew exactly what he was going through, because she had faced similar pressure. Senator Rodriguez offered to hold congressional hearings on billionaire influence in media and politics. She couldn't promise results, but she could promise visibility. Charlie agreed, but on one condition. The hearings had to include voices beyond just him. Young activists, independent journalists, whistleblowers from tech companies, people who'd been silenced for speaking truth to power. The hearings became a sensation. Charlie testified about Vanderbilt's offer and the subsequent retaliation. A former Vanderbilt media executive turned whistleblower revealed documents showing a pattern of buying influence across the political spectrum. Tech company employees testified about algorithms being manipulated to suppress certain voices while amplifying others. Marcus Vanderbilt was called to testify. He appeared confident, flanked by an army of lawyers. He denied any wrongdoing, called the allegations conspiracy theories, and painted himself as a philanthropist being attacked for his success. But Senator Rodriguez was relentless. She produced email chains showing Vanderbilt's team coordinating media attacks on Charlie. She showed financial records of shell companies used to funnel money to seemingly independent news outlets. She revealed a recording leaked by a conscience-stricken employee of Vanderbilt saying, "If Kirk won't take the carrot, give him the stick until he breaks or disappears." The hearing room erupted. Vanderbilt's lawyers immediately called for a recess. News networks that had been running hit pieces on Charlie suddenly went quiet.
But Charlie knew the real battle wasn't in a congressional hearing room. It was in the hearts and minds of everyday people who had to decide what kind of country they wanted to live in. In the months that followed, the landscape began to shift. Marcus Vanderbilt, facing multiple investigations and a PR nightmare, quietly backed away from his media acquisitions. Several of the influencers he had invested in saw their credibility collapse as audiences abandoned them in droves. But the damage to Charlie's organization was real. Despite the grassroots support, they were operating on a fraction of their previous budget. Charlie had to make impossible decisions about which programs to cut, which employees to let go, which initiatives to pause. One afternoon, Sarah went into early labor. The complications were serious, requiring an emergency C-section. Charlie sat in the hospital waiting room, consumed by guilt. The stress of the past months had taken its toll on his wife, and he couldn't help but feel responsible. When the doctor finally came out and told him that both Sarah and the baby were going to be okay, Charlie broke down crying. In the recovery room, holding his newborn daughter for the first time, Charlie felt the full weight of his choices. This tiny, perfect human being would grow up in a world shaped by the decisions people like him made. Would she be proud of her father? Would she understand why he chose principle, over the comfortable life he could have given her. Sarah, exhausted but smiling, reached out and touched his hand. She told him that she had something to confess. During those dark weeks when the attacks were worst, when money was tightest, when she was scared for their future, she had doubted. She had wondered if he had made a mistake. She had even thought about calling Vanderbilt herself to see if the offer was still available. But then she had attended one of his town halls. She had seen a teenage boy approach Charlie after the event, tears streaming down his face. The boy told Charlie that he had been about to give up on everything, on politics, on his country, on the idea that good people still existed. But watching someone actually stand up to corruption had given him hope. The boy said he wanted to be like Charlie when he grew up. Sarah told Charlie that in that moment she realized something. Their daughter might not grow up with every material comfort, but she would grow up with something far more valuable, a father she could be proud of, a father who showed her that integrity isn't just a word, it's a choice you make every single day. 6 months after turning down Vanderbilt's offer, Charlie received an unexpected package. Inside was a handwritten letter from his mentor, along with a check for $50,000. The letter explained that the mentor had sold his media company, the one he had built with Vanderbilt's blood money years ago, and was donating a portion of the proceeds to organizations fighting for media integrity. He wrote that watching Charlie's courage had inspired him to try to make amends for his own compromises. He said it was too late for him to reclaim his voice, but maybe he could help amplify Charlie's. The letter ended with a quote, "Integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching, but courage is doing the right thing even when everyone is watching and it costs you everything." Charlie's organization stabilized. They were smaller than before, leaner, more focused, but the people who remained were true believers. The audience they built was more engaged than ever. They had weathered the storm and emerged with their credibility intact. Other young activists began following Charlie's model, turning down corporate money, staying independent, building grassroots movements. A new generation of voices emerged, one that couldn't be bought or silenced by billionaire bullies. One evening, Charlie appeared on a podcast. The host asked him the question everyone wanted to know. Did he ever regret turning down Vanderbilt's offer? Charlie paused, choosing his words carefully. He said that regret was the wrong word. There were moments of doubt, absolutely. Moments when he questioned whether he could have done more good with more resources. Moments when watching his wife stress about bills or his mother worry about threats made him wonder if he had been selfish in choosing principle. But then he thought about the young woman who told him he had restored her faith in integrity. The teenager who said Charlie had given him hope. The dozens of other activists who had found the courage to stand up to their own Vanderbilts. The daughter who would grow up knowing her father had chosen her respect over easy money. No, he didn't regret it. Because some things you can't buy back once you've sold them. Your voice, your credibility, your soul. The host asked one final question. What would Charlie say to Marcus Vanderbilt if they ever met again? Charlie smiled. He would thank him, because Vanderbilt had given him an incredibly valuable gift, the gift of clarity. The offer had forced him to confront who he really was and what he really stood for. It had tested him in the fire and shown him what he was made of. And perhaps more importantly, it had shown millions of other people that you can say no to power, that you can face retaliation and survive, that integrity isn't just a nice idea, it's a practical way to live, even in a world that seems designed to crush it. As Charlie left the podcast studio that day, his phone buzzed with notifications. His daughter's first birthday party was tomorrow, and Sarah was sending him reminders about picking up the cake. He smiled, thinking about how different his life could have been if he had taken Vanderbilt's offer. He would have had a corner office on the 85th floor instead of a cramped space above a pizzeria. He would have driven a luxury car instead of his ancient Toyota.
He would have been invited to exclusive parties with powerful people instead of backyard barbecues with his grassroots team. But he wouldn't have been able to look his daughter in the eye and tell her the truth about who her father was. And in the end, that mattered more than anything money could buy. Marcus Vanderbilt tried to buy Charlie Kirk, but what he didn't understand, what men like him never understand, is that some people simply aren't for sale, not at any price. The story of Charlie's choice spread far beyond conservative circles. It became a case study taught in ethics classes, a cautionary tale shared in boardrooms, an inspiration quoted by activists across the political spectrum fighting their own battles against corruption and compromise. Because in a world where it seems like everything and everyone has a price, the story of someone who refused to be bought isn't just inspiring, it's revolutionary. Charlie Kirk walked away from $50 million, but in return, he gained something infinitely more valuable: the ability to sleep at night knowing he had stayed true to himself, the respect of people who mattered, the legacy he would leave for his daughter, and the unshakable knowledge that when his easy path beckoned with all its seductive promises, he chose the hard right over the easy wrong. That choice echoed far beyond his own life. It rippled outward, touching millions of people who saw his example and found the courage to make their own hard choices. Students who stood up to corrupt professors, employees who reported wrongdoing instead of staying silent, politicians who voted their conscience instead of their party line. One person's integrity can be a candle in the darkness, and when enough candles are lit, even the deepest darkness cannot prevail. Charlie Kirk's candle was burning bright, and it was lighting the way for countless others to follow.
And so we come to the end of Charlie Kirk's story, or rather, the beginning of a new chapter. Because stories like this don't really end. They ripple forward through time, inspiring others, creating change, building movements that outlast any one person. What can we learn from Charlie's impossible choice? First, that integrity is not abstract. It's not a philosophy or a talking point. It's a series of decisions you make when the cost is real and the pressure is overwhelming. It's choosing truth when lies are profitable. It's choosing principle when compromise is easier. It's choosing who you are over what you could have. Second, that you are not alone. When Charlie stood up to Marcus Vanderbilt, he thought he was fighting a solitary battle. But his courage awakened courage in others. His stand gave permission to thousands of people who were tired of corruption, tired of compromise, tired of watching everyone sell out. One person's integrity can light a fire that spreads farther than any billionaire's money can reach. Third, that the cost of selling out is always higher than the cost of standing firm. Charlie could have taken the $50 million. He could have convinced himself that he would do good with it, that he would play the game and change it from the inside. But he would have lost the one thing that made him valuable in the first place: his authenticity, his voice, his soul. And finally, that legacy matters more than luxury. Charlie's daughter will grow up without a trust fund or a mansion, but she will grow up with something far more precious: a father she can be proud of, a living example that good people still exist, that integrity is not just possible, it's practical. Today, Charlie Kirk's organization continues its work. It's smaller than it might have been with Vanderbilt's billions, but it's more powerful because it's built on truth instead of money. The young people who follow him know he can't be bought. And in a world where almost everyone seems to have a price, that makes him priceless. Marcus Vanderbilt is still wealthy, still powerful, still buying influence and silencing voices. But he learned something from Charlie Kirk. Some people cannot be collected. Some voices cannot be controlled. And sometimes the smallest light can outshine the biggest fortune. This story is true in the ways that matter most. Not because it happened exactly this way to exactly these people, but because it happens every day to someone, somewhere. Someone gets offered the deal. Someone has to choose between comfort and conscience. Someone has to decide what they're really made of. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe you're facing your own Marcus Vanderbilt, a boss who wants you to compromise your ethics, a system that rewards dishonesty, a choice between doing what's right and doing what's easy. If that's you, remember Charlie's story. Remember that saying no to corruption is never the wrong choice. Remember that integrity costs something, but selling out costs everything. The question is not whether you'll face that moment. The question is, when you do, who will you choose to be? Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, if it inspired you, if it reminded you that integrity still matters in a world that often seems to have forgotten, then share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with young people who are wondering if good people still exist. Share it with anyone who's facing their own impossible choice. And here's my challenge to you. Don't just be inspired, be the inspiration. The next time you face pressure to compromise, remember Charlie Kirk walking away from $50 million. Remember that your integrity is worth more than any price tag someone tries to put on it. We live in a time when it's easy to be cynical, to believe that everyone is corrupt, that nothing matters, that you might as well sell out because everyone else has. This story exists to remind you that's a lie. Integrity is alive. Courage still exists, and ordinary people still do extraordinary things when they refuse to compromise. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories of courage, integrity, and people who refuse to be bought, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're building a community of people who believe that character still counts. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever had to make a choice between integrity and money? Between principle and comfort? What did you choose? And do you regret it? Your story might inspire someone else who's facing that choice right now. Like this video if it impacted you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, in a world where everything seems to be for sale, being the person who refuses to sell out is the most revolutionary act there is. This is your reminder that you are not powerless. You are not insignificant. Your choices matter. Your integrity matters. And when you stand firm in your principles, you give others permission to do the same. Stay strong, stay true, and remember, some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's integrity. Subscribe now for more stories of courage, integrity, and people who changed the world by refusing to compromise. I'll see you in the next one.